welcome to another episode of Vantage Point. As you can see, we have two guests today in the studio. We have Dr. Diane Jayatilaka and also a golden lady here, which I'm sure Dr. Diane Jayatilaka, who we are usually in conversation on Vantage Point, where we discuss political matters from a different perspective, from a more scientific, from a more people-based perspective, answering your questions and also trying to lessen the confusion that persists in the political arena in Sri Lanka at the moment.
The award for the best TV program presenter, the award goes to Mahina Bonzo of MTV.
Welcome to Vantage Point here on Newsfirst. First, let me welcome Dr. Diane Jayatilaka. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, and Mahina, let me congratulate you. It was lovely to see you go up on stage, and of course it's not new to you. You've got a whole wardrobe full of these awards, I think. But to collect the award for this show,
Yes,
I congratulate you and our whole team.
Actually, it was a team effort. I mean, Vantage Point and also Sinhala language show, Sitija, won an award at the State Television Awards ceremony just 2 weeks ago. That was incidentally right after the day we recorded our Vantage Point episode for the beginning of this month. So a good start. It's been nearly 2 years of the show, and we've come a long way. There's a long way more to go, as does the Sri Lankan political landscape.
We'll probably go on longer than the Parliament.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's an interesting topic, Doctor, to talk about during today's discussion, which is going to center a lot on the Parliament and about, obviously, a number that is in people's minds right now, which is the number 19. Earlier it was the number 13, now it's the number 19. So the 19th Amendment to the Constitution is being much talked about. There has been a lot of conflicting opinions regarding the 19th Amendment from within the government, from within opposition parties in Parliament. And that's causing a sort of a ripple effect in Parliament as well in terms of the general election that is in the not-so-foreseeable future. Doctor, let's start off with the 19th Amendment. Now, the 19th Amendment, we spoke about it in our previous show. It was gazetted on the 13th of March and then brought in for cabinet discussion on the 15th. And there was a lot of criticism about the 19th Amendment, specifically regarding the powers that are going to be handed over to the Prime Minister. Now, certain parties, certain critics are saying that this is an effort made by the Prime Minister to further his political gains. But from then to now, Doctor, and this week is going to be crucial because the debate is on. There might be a vote as well regarding the 19th Amendment, but the parties are split. So how does it work now?
Well, it's been very controversial. It's been a rocky road, and as we speak, Mahina, we do not know whether the 19th Amendment will be voted upon. We should know that. But there seems to be turmoil in the House, in Parliament. And that's because the whole thing was mismanaged. The whole thing was mismanaged. To start with, no minority government anywhere in the world usually tries to move on constitutional amendments, because it's a big deal. And you need a broad consensus.
And also a lot of time. And here they have put a cap on it by saying we need to do this before 100 years.
Exactly. It's a fast track, and it's a minority government. Now, if you take our previous constitutions or efforts at constitution making, you had the 72 Constitution and the 78 Constitution, both of which were ushered in by administrations which enjoyed at least a two-thirds majority in the House. In the case of 78, it was a 5/6 majority. And even flawed legislation such as the 18th Amendment was the product of governments that had stable and secure majorities. Here you have a government that manifestly doesn't have the command of the majority of the Parliament. trying something as ambitious as a major constitutional reform and order fast track. Now that is bad enough. But when you don't create the atmosphere, when you're not willing to make the trade-offs, then even if you get it through, and as I said, as we speak, we don't know whether it'll get through, you have lacerated the body politic. Now, the UNP knows that it doesn't have the numbers. So it's got to play nicey-nice with the SLFP, which means accommodating and readily accommodating the SLFP's request or requirement or demand, let's call it a demand, for electoral reform to be taken up simultaneously. So, if you want to do things on a fast track, nobody's told you to, but you want to stick to a 100-day timetable, and you want to be ambitious, though you're a minority government, you want to push through a major constitutional reform, then you have to be nice to the people who have a majority of votes in the House. You must accommodate their grievances and their requirements, their demands, and you must not be seen to launch a witch hunt against their most illustrious leaders, which is exactly what has happened. The atmosphere of cooperation is broken down in the Parliament, and on this rickety bridge, we are watching the attempt to pass the heavy lorry of the 19th Amendment. Now, it might happen, it doesn't look like it, but none of this need have been necessary if just some common sense had prevailed.
Now, Dr. Jayatilaka, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, the draft bills, the bill that was gazetted, there has been a lot of sort of conflicting opinions regarding the difference between the bill, the original draft, and also the one that was gazetted.
Yep.
And then there was a 12-page annexed into this bill. So is it also to do with the transparency or the discrepancies in the passage followed to, gazette this bill and also bring it up for cabinet discussion?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when it's a constitution, you have to operate according to certain norms. What happened here? You had an original draft which was circulating. Then you had a gazette. Now that's what's important, because that is what petitions can be filed on the basis of. You file a petition on the gazetted bill. That was March 13. But it came up for discussion in Cabinet, the 19th Amendment, on the 15th of March. So Mahina, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe gazetted the bill before he had got concurrence in the Cabinet. On the 15th. That's very strange. That's the cart before the horse. And then, to confound matters further, he presents a 12-page document with further amendments to the amendment, but outside the Gazette. Now, the citizenry seizes upon the Gazette, petitioners file their petitions, the Supreme Court adjudicates on the petitions, because that's what the Supreme Court can do. But the 12-page document is then sent through the AG to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court cannot pronounce on it because there has been no petition, because nobody saw it since it wasn't in the Gazette.
And a lot of political party representatives like Venerable Atharaliya Ratanathera have alleged that they haven't really got a proper copy of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution.
Absolutely.
And this is just 2 or 3 days before the debate, before the bill goes in for debate.
And this is a partner of the coalition government, Mahina. I mean, this is not some sort of rabid anti-UNP, anti-government maverick saying this. This is a coalition partner who says, I think on your station, if I remember rightly, says, we asked for the singular version of this. of what we are supposed to vote on. We were told it's not ready. We asked for Tamil version. We were told that's not ready either. And then we asked for an English language version. And we were told that's not completed. So, a few days ago, even a coalition partner didn't have a clean text to study before they went to vote this week. So, there's something terribly, terribly wrong in terms of process. Who planned this roadmap? What kind of roadmap is this? This is not the way to get a constitutional amendment through, especially when you don't have a two-thirds. And you're counting on the SLFP. And then you don't treat the SLFP the way this government has treated the SLFP. But obviously even the coalition partners are not happy about the process. And there was a huge punch-up with some coalition partners accusing Prime Minister Wickremesinghe of a constitutional conspiracy. And this was all out in the open.
And this is even his close associates in the national government saying that there is a conspiracy and that there is something that is being brought from the back door.
Absolutely.
To increase the powers of the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. And then the Prime Minister assures the party leaders a few days ago, look, all right, I'm not going to bring those amendments that were in the 12-page thingy. And I shall drop the ones that were in the Supreme Court, the call for referendum. But just before that, he had tried to smuggle all of that in. So there's a question of credibility. I mean, why did he try to do that? And it was Mr. Sumandran who took the strongest stand at the party leaders' meeting and said, no, we have every right to bring in those amendments which were not in the Gazette as part of the bill to be voted on this week. And that got deadlocked. And then Mr. Wickremesinghe in a concession said, all right, I'm not going to include those sections that have been earmarked as requiring a referendum. But there's a credibility gap, Mahina, when you keep shifting from one foot to another. And then the SLFP has said, we need linkage. We want the electoral reform.
And it has actually now said, I mean, this week's newspaper said that it has withdrawn its support from the 19th Amendment to the Constitution and that it would not support it unless these electoral reforms are brought and enacted together with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Is that a legitimate request?
Well, I'm a realist, Mahina. Firstly, it's not wildly outrageous because we're talking about the Dinesh Gunawardena committee report. Now, that was the product of several years of deliberation, of multi-party deliberation. So it's not like the 19th Amendment. It's not a rush job. It exists. So it's not a way out demand. And now, it may be debatable. The merits and demerits of this are debatable. I myself am somewhat partial to the proportional representation system because I think it's more accurate a mirror. But the UNP needs the SLFP's support. And it cannot, unless it's extremely arrogant, which it probably is, expect the SLFP to sign off on a blank check. The SLFP wants something in return. That's the way it works in life, in the marketplace, in politics. So if you're not willing to give your partner, who incidentally has a lot more votes than you, if you're not willing to give the partner what he or she wants, then you're not serious. I mean, you're not a serious negotiator. And on top of that, you sort of issue summons and try to harass the best loved leaders of that party. At this time, when you're going for a vote, the same week, what were these guys thinking, mind?
Dr. Jayatilaka, let's just go to a technical question now. The 19th Amendment is going to be presented in Parliament for debate. By the time this show goes on air, it would have already been put into Parliament for a debate or a possible vote. And this is without the part that the Supreme Court calls has asked for a referendum.
So they say nobody's seen this.
If that is the case, Doctor, how does it transpire now? Does this bill, does the bill get passed without the part that includes a referendum, which is in fact the most important part of the 19th Amendment, because it talks about executive powers? And then how does it work now, technically? Because it
works like, it works crazily, like an exam. At an exam, you sit there, you're given the question paper, then you know what's in the question paper. But this is a vote on a huge constitutional amendment. The MPs do not know what's there. Whether it adds on anything from the 12-page document, whether it doesn't, it has to be gone through with a fine-tooth comb. You have to go clause by clause. And then there may be amendments. The others, somebody might decide that, we can improve on this, or there's a lacuna. Because, frankly, Mahina, there's a serious problem here. And here I would like to quote somebody whose views I usually don't share. Professor Kumar David. He was, together with Venerable Sobita, the twin architects of the single issue abolish the presidency common candidacy project, which saw fruition in President Sirisena's win. Now, in the weekend's newspapers and websites, Professor Kumar David, who is for the abolition of the executive presidency, unlike myself, he says, the Supreme Court judgment was a good one, but doesn't anybody see that this 19th Amendment is going to lead to an enormous constitutional crisis and a deadlock in the functioning of the state? Why? Because the 19th Amendment, even with those parts that the Supreme Court has said require a referendum moved out, would create two equal centers of power, the presidency and the prime ministership, and there's going to be a clash. He says this is not France. In France you have a Senate which links the president and the prime minister. Here you're going to have a clash. Is going to be partisan warfare between the presidency and the prime ministership. So, Professor Kumar David, coming from a very different perspective than my own, says this is dangerous. And therefore, Mahina, I would say that it shouldn't be trashed, but you can't rush it through. This is not a hamburger. You can't just flip it over and serve it. But it has to be scrutinized.
Yes, but this is included. This was in the manifesto that got Mr. Maithripala Sirisena to where he is now, the executive president of this country. He doesn't want the word executive to be used, but president of this country. So isn't that a promise made to the people, abolishing of the executive powers of the president, bringing in independent commissions, holding elections thereafter? Aren't these all in this 100-day program that is expiring very soon?
Mahina, there are two interpretations, aren't there, within the coalition that brought President Sirisena into office. That's the deadlock between the UNP and JVP on the one hand, and TNA, UNP, JVP, TNA. And the JHU, which says, and possibly President Sirisena himself, because if President Sirisena were entirely happy with the way the 19th Amendment was going, he would have convinced the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, his party, just to endorse it.
So you're implying that he is not happy with the process of the 19th Amendment?
If he were, he would have been far more proactive and open in endorsing it. What he's doing is he's saying, look, I promise you that these things are going to change and so on, but he's kind of hedging his bets. Therefore, the JVP has criticized him, perhaps a little unfairly, and said that the SLFP filibuster is really a proxy for President Sirisena. I don't go that far, but I think his heart is not really in it, because otherwise he could have convinced the SLFP of the merits of this. But he hasn't. He has not intervened in that manner, because there was in fact a discrepancy at the heart of this. One interpretation was abolition, or go as far as possible as abolition. What I call the mini-max, the maximalists. Then there were the others, and I personally tend to go along with that, others who felt that the mandate was to trim the excess. So you don't take away as much as you can. You take away strictly what is necessary, what is in excess from the executive presidency. So that's this debate, and that's not being solved even within the government, mind. Therefore, what I think what should have been done,
and that is what is causing a sort of a split.
That is one of the things.
That is one of the main things.
Definitely,
yes.
that's one. The other is that it's a government unprecedentedly, which is a minority government, and is trying to do something as radical as moving a huge constitutional amendment. It doesn't happen. Even much milder constitutional amendments are usually moved by governments with a secure majority. And the third point is that they're trying to do it while waging a political war against the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, whose votes they need. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's such volatility. Mm-hmm. Even if this is voted on, and I'm not confident that it will be, it's already caused so much open dissension and conflict. You need consensus for constitutional reform. Mm-hmm. But consensus is the last thing you're seeing now.
And in this backdrop, looking from outside the picture, from a Vantage point of view, does this 19th Amendment to the Constitution look like it will be enacted, Doctor? Let's be brutally honest.
I think it, well, I'm kind of dodging the question because then I would have to say, do I think it's likely to be voted through? I would say in its present form, it's somewhat doubtful. Mm-hmm. In its present form. This could have been done differently. If, for instance, the 19th Amendment were to be limited to the independent commissions and the two-term limit, I think everybody would support it without conditions. But this is far more ambitious. This is about the Prime Minister and the President. It's on the vertical axis. That's the problem. That's why it's 70 pages. If it were only what everybody could agree to, which is the restoration of the commissions strengthened and reposition of term limits, then this could be over this week. I mean, it could be done easily. But the UNP is far more ambitious than that. It's trying to shove the whole lorry over this rickety bridge.
If hypothetically the 19th Amendment is not passed in Parliament, what does that constitute? What does that imply? Does that imply a lack of confidence?
It does. It does. I mean, it's a failure.
And does
it's
that
a
then,
failure. If they can't pass the 19th Amendment, it's a failure.
So in that case, it could go in for a low confidence motion? Can somebody bring in a low confidence
Well,
motion?
there is a no confidence motion lined up, Mahina, but it's not on this. The no confidence motion is against Ravi Karunanayake, the Minister of Finance. And I heard or read somewhere that because of what has happened with Mr. Mahendran, that the inquiry has just exonerated him, and there's a problem there, that the opposition, which in fact has a lot more seats than the government, will escalate this, and it might turn out to be a no confidence motion against the Prime Minister himself as the appointing authority.
But that's completely for a different reason.
It's for a different reason. But if the 19th Amendment doesn't go through, or if it goes through in a way that's sharply polarizing, then there's going to be a crisis of governability. I mean, that Parliament, look at it. I mean, there are protests, there are agitations. I'm not saying they're wrong. That's a reaction to this very abrupt move to haul former President Rajapaksa before the Bribery Commission for having given a portfolio to this Satanaka. Now, there's too much volatility now. Too many cooks spoiling the broth in the government. the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. I know I'm coming out with all these cliches, but it's chaotic. Therefore, the only way out would be, I think, to dissolve and go for an election.
Dr. Jayatilaka, you were speaking about the dissolving of parliament and going for a general election. Now, Maithripala Sirisena, the president of Sri Lanka, has openly stated that general elections will be held in the next 2 to 3 months. How does all of this impact the general elections that are going to come ahead?
Well, President Sirisena has said two different things. He's told the Time magazine that he will probably dissolve in May earlier than later, which would probably result in elections in late June or early July. That's to Time magazine. He is reported to have told the Sri Lanka Freedom Party that he will not dissolve parliament until the electoral reforms, i.e. the 20th Amendment, is passed. Now, the UNP says that's going to take time because you have to agree on a formula. The smaller parties belonging to the ethnic and religious minorities as well as the ideological minorities, the JVP, they stand totally opposed to these electoral reforms. Now, what is President Sirisena going to do? If he is going to cater to the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, he antagonizes the smaller parties, some of who represent those communities and those areas that gave him the victory. So he's caught between his party, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, and his allies, the minority parties and the JVP. So he risks a split in the national executive. Therefore, I don't know how he's juggling now. I don't know how he's going to resolve this. If he has a parliament which looks deadlocked, I don't see how he can wait till the 20th Amendment because, okay, the SLFP has the number.
But the SLFP too is split. We have the UPFA, a huge group actually supporting the former president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and the sitting protest that was held in Parliament was in support of Mahinda Rajapaksa. And then we also have a group that is supporting Maithripala Sirisena, then a group that is opposing vehemently Ranil Wickremesinghe. So how do all of these groups kind of fit in to this puzzle and face the general election?
Now, I say throw them all in at the deep end of the swimming pool at an election and let's see what happens. But anyway.
I don't think they can all swim, Dr. Probably.
Look at the numbers. Now, as we speak, this protest is going on, Occupy Parliament, by parliamentarians. And the numbers which your station is reporting show that over 100 have lined up in support of former President Rajapaksa, so against any move against him. So, okay, that's an indication of emotional loyalty or political loyalty. If that number is anything to go by, and those are the only numbers we have, if that number is anything to go by, it looks like within the SLFP parliamentary group or the opposition parliamentary group, the balance has shifted very considerably in the direction of the former president. Now, President Sirisena is staying out of this at the moment, which is a very wise thing to do. Why should he get caught in the crossfire? But you can see, this is an indicator, it's a litmus test that it's not 50-50. It's not 50% for Mahinda Rajapaksa, 50% against him within the SLFP and the opposition parliamentary group. It's lining up pretty much in sympathy and solidarity with Mahinda Rajapaksa. Now, that's at the level of parliamentarians. My sense of this, Mahina, is that the parliamentary group is where Mahinda Rajapaksa is least popular, and yet he's got over 100 guys supporting him. His popularity in the SLFP increases. It's pyramidic. It looks like it's more than 60-40 at the parliamentary level, but if you move down that pyramid, the slopes of the pyramid, the provincial councillors and the Pradeshia Sabha members, the closest to the grassroots, then the percentage of pro-Mahinda elements increase exponentially. So the SLFP is going to have to make a choice. I've sort of seen this happen before, because in 88 there was a strong faction against Rana Singha Premadasa being given the nomination for the presidential slot within the UNP. Lalita Aturad Mudali, Gamini Disanayaka, they never really forgave President Jayawardena for agreeing to Mr. Premadasa as the candidate. But how did that happen? Though Lalita and Gamini were close to President Jayawardena, personally closer than Mr. Premadasa. What happened was that the secretary of the party, Ranjan Vijayaratne, was tasked by President Jayawardena with checking the pulse of the UNP. This was a time of great turmoil for the UNP. The JVP was killing UNP. You wouldn't think so to see them in the national executive now. But the JVP was not only killing them, banning funerals. You couldn't raise a dead body above the knee. And Ranjan Vijayaratne went around and he came and reported, he presented a report to President Jayawardena saying there's only one person who can win this election for us, and that is Rana Singha Premadasa. Why? Because he can take the nationalist wind out of the SLFP's sails. Now, today, I do not know whether President Sirisena will be as sagacious as President Rajapaksa. President Jayawardena. President Jayawardena cared for his party above everything else, for the UNP. Now, we have a contrasting example of President D.B. Vijayatunga, who really didn't care too much whether the UNP was going to be in office or not. He didn't contest, and he sort of weakened the UNP by freezing out the Premadasa faction after the death of President Premadasa, of course, and he sort of was a transitional figure, handing power over to Chandrika, facilitating the SLFP's victory. Now, President Sirisena has these two contrasting models to go with. Is he going to do a J.R. Jayawardena, which means asking Susil Prem Jayant or Anura Pridarshana Yapa, or both, maybe John Senivaratna as well, the elders of the party, to give him a report as to who can win the forthcoming election for the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. And if they come back and say, look, it's Mahinda Rajapaksa, is he going to do a J.R. Jayawardena and say, all right, I don't like the guy, makes me feel sort of creepy crawly all over, but I care for the party more.
Let's be realistic, Dr. Jayathala. This is politics.
Yeah.
In politics, yes, there are people who care for their party, but Maithripala Sirisena had to get the support of so many people to defeat President Rajapaksa. Do you think that he would just hand over and say, yes, I think Rajapaksa would be the best candidate?
Well, Mahina, it really depends on whether you...
And President Rajapaksa, Doctor, comes with, as you said, the popularity, he comes with a family. So isn't it just going to mess things up further?
Well, he's kind of, the family is very low profile now. But look at it from the point of view of Maithripala Sirisena. Now, I can't get into his head, but if I were Maithripala Sirisena, I'd be caught between two considerations. One is, here's this guy who may be more popular than I in the party and maybe even in the country. I don't know. It might grow. And, people tend to come around him and he'll be backslapping and he's going to make me feel bad. But on the other hand, if the 19th Amendment does not go through and the present constitution remains, hey, What's the maximum that Mahinda Rajapaksa can do even if he is Prime Minister? Not much. I'm the President. On the other hand, I have Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is trying to take my power from me. I thank God for the Supreme Court. It stopped him in his tracks. But he's told the country, he's told his party that if he wins an election, there's going to be a new constitution where all power is going to be with the Prime Minister. That's out in the open. So I may not like Mahinda Rajapaksa, but he's not going to do anything. He's not going to take my power from me. He's just going to be the Prime Minister. He's not interested in changing the constitution.
But that certain part in the 19th Amendment, Doctor, is, as the Supreme Court said, has to be done through a referendum. So how would that impact in this case?
Well, Mahina, the safest thing for President Sirisena is if there's no 19th Amendment at all, or if it's the most mild 19th Amendment, and if it is a Prime Minister who is not committed to returning to this huge constitutional change and taking the power of the executive president. Now, Mahinda Rajapaksa has not been talking about that. He's not saying, look, I hope to be Prime Minister, therefore, I'm for constitutional change and I want the 19th Amendment. The people who support him in the SLFP seem to be anti-19th Amendment, despite the fact that he might be the beneficiary. On the other hand, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was President Sirisena's partner, is committed to a fresh constitution. Jayampathy Wickramaratne said after the Supreme Court ruling, strangely, almost surrealistically, he pronounced that this ruling means that we can abolish the executive presidency even without a referendum. Now, how he came to that conclusion, I do not know, because the Supreme Court has said that even the transfer of some of those powers to the Prime Minister requires a referendum, because it impinges on popular sovereignty. But if Jayampathy thinks that they can go for abolition of the executive presidency without a referendum, and if Ranil Wickremesinghe tells his party, we are going to win, then we are going to have a constituent assembly, we are going to have a new constitution in which power is transferred to the Prime Minister, who poses a bigger threat to President Sirisena? It's not a question of who you like or who you feel comfortable about. He probably doesn't feel very comfortable with the idea of Mahinda Rajapaksa being PM. But in terms of losing your executive power, it's Ranil and the UNP and Jayampathy and the JVP who are committed to trying again to abolish the executive presidency.
Let's talk about the public's perspective. This is, we're talking about politics, about parliament, about the parliamentarians, but the people who appoint these parliamentarians or who even elect a president are the people. Do you think the people who elected Maithripala Sirisena would be comfortable with Mahinda Rajapaksa coming in once again into the political sphere and taking up the position of Prime Minister?
Well, Mahina, it all depends on the terrain. Now, you have to look at the figures of the January 8th election. If you take the island, the areas in which the minorities were a majority voted very heavily for candidate Sirisena. In fact, his majority of the 6 lakh majority comes from the votes cast in the north and east, because if you take the figures outside of the north and east, he lost and Mahinda Rajapaksa won. Now, this upcoming election, Mahina, does not really take place between the UNP and the SLFP in the north and east or the plantations. Those areas will vote for their ethnic or ethno-religious parties, the TNA
and the
SLMC. This upcoming election takes place between the UNP and SLFP in the southern two-thirds, where Mahinda Rajapaksa won. So the Swan disintegrates. The JVP contests separately, the TNA, the SLMC. So it's UNP versus SLFP. And UNP versus SLFP in the southern two-thirds is where Mahinda won. So I don't see any I don't see a problem there. It's where he pulled it off. It's his terrain. Now, the second thing is, there are those who are critical of Mahinda Rajapaksa, and they decided to vote against him, even in the south. Now, would they or would they not think that, okay, we got rid of him as president. Some of us are there are some who feel bad about that because they feel that they wanted to teach him a lesson, but instead he was defeated. But let's leave that aside. Isn't it possible that the voter will think that there's a win-win scenario here? You've got Maithripala Sirisena as president, and he can balance off the weaknesses of Mahinda Rajapaksa, or the excesses of Mahinda Rajapaksa. But you've got Mahinda Rajapaksa coming into parliament as the PM, which can rebalance the present equation, and therefore you have the best of both worlds. Mahinda provides a kind of a robust nationalist spine, the strong state, and Maithripala Sirisena provides an antidote in terms of a more modest, lightweight style of governance. And that could be seen as, in fact, a dream team. Because right now there are some criticisms about the lack of direction. It's like a ship that's, without a captain. So if Mahinda comes in as PM, he can't threaten Maithripala Sirisena, who's president.
Doctor, can I ask you a personal question, Doctor?
Sure,
now,
sure.
What you're saying is that Mahinda Rajapaksa is the best bet in terms of, winning this general election. You have critics as well. Everybody has critics.
Yeah.
And these critics of yours,
Yeah.
when you read your articles, they've always said that you are more supportive towards Mahinda and therefore you hold this view. Do you agree with that, Doctor? Or are you just talking about in general terms and not getting your sentiments involved there?
Well, my sentiments, my sort of sympathies for Mahinda Rajapaksa have not taken me to the point of saying, look, let's do the 19th Amendment and have a very strong PM, because I'm pretty sure that the guy I like, Mahinda Rajapaksa, is going to be the PM and I want him to have all these powers. But that's not my main criterion. My main criterion is it's bad for the country, so I'm opposed to the 19th Amendment. Whether it's going to be Mahinda who's going to be PM or not, it doesn't matter to me. So, my preference for Mahinda Rajapaksa is not
clouding the overall picture?
It comes in, but it's not the main criterion. Looked at objectively, there are two things here. In politics, figures like Mahinda Rajapaksa always make a comeback, whether it is Juan Perón in Argentina, Charles de Gaulle in France, Sarkozy now, a not very flattering figure, Berlusconi in Italy, Indira Gandhi, 3 years after she lost, Nawaz Sharif. Now, what is there in common between all of these? These are what are known as populist candidates. These are populist figures, larger than life figures, somehow tied in with the sense of nation, of nationalism, but also populist. Such figures almost always make a comeback, and I don't think Mahinda Rajapaksa is an exception. There's another good example in Vladimir Putin. So I think that he is a credible comeback candidate. And secondly, if you look at heavyweight figures, who does the SLFP have to present as a figure running against Ranil Wickremesinghe?
Well, this is a good sort of area up for debate. I mean, there'll be a lot of opinions that would have been brought into this question. Let's move away from the candidate who would pose the best chance of winning for the general election. Let's move on to another force. In all our elections in this country, I've seen there's always been a third force in this country's political landscape, and that has more or less been the JVP, except for one election where we saw the Sarath Fonseca's party actually coming in as a third force. But JVP has constantly been that voice of conscience since of late. Anurukumara Dissanayake, who you have lauded for always being that voice of conscience and reason in Parliament, has now found itself in a bit of a dilemma. It's seen its figurehead, its sort of poster boy, Somawan Samarasinha, the leader of the JVP, saying that he's quitting his membership of the party after several years of being in the party. And he's saying this particularly because he feels the party is not aligned with its Marxist ideals, its principles that it has always stood for. Do you see the JVP moving away from these principles, as Somawan Samarasinha says, or is it just an excuse for him to leave the party?
Well, Somawan sir is not the poster boy, he's the granddaddy of the tribe. He's the last best known survivor of the 1960s, pre-1971 insurrection JVP. He wasn't there at the founding in 1965, 50 years ago, by Vijay Veera, but he joined in the latter half of the 1960s. So he's the oldest, he's the best known of the old guard. I don't think he can set up a rival outfit and pose a threat to the JVP.
He's actually said that he is going to form a new party.
Well, he's going to form a party unless he gets some young, well-known guys from the JVP. He won't be able to match or even compete with the JVP. But Somawan sir, having stayed with the party through thick and thin, and being the symbol of the continuity of the party, the connection to the roots of the party, now leaving the JVP means something is going wrong. Now, what's going wrong? I don't want to get into the debate of whether it is deviated from its principles, but I do know that it is deviated from its tradition, and it's moved out of the space that it has occupied in Sri Lankan politics. I'm not sure it's made a smart move. Now, the JVP has always done one of three things. It's gone up against the system violently, which is not a good thing. It never worked for the JVP, so let's set that aside. Numbers 2 and 3 are within the democratic framework. They've either been a third force critiquing and decrying both the UNP and the SLFP, or it has been the radical component and driving force of a broad, what they would call anti-imperialist, anti-separatist, kind of a national liberation front, which has sometimes included the SLFP. And in that avatar, the JVP has taken the right wing of the UNP as the main enemy. Now, from the 1970s, in fact, and certainly during the Jayawardena administration, it is none other than Prime Minister Wickremesinghe who was the poster boy or the main target of the JVP as the most ideologically right-wing and pro-Western leader of the UNP. There was a time when the JVP was flirting with President Premadasa, but never with Ranil, because Ranil was seen as his father's son. His father was Esmond Wickremesinghe, and Ranil was seen as being on the far right of the UNP. Latterly, he was also seen as soft on Tamil separatism and the Tigers. So, he was a hate symbol for the JVP. They were also critical at times of President Kumaratunga, though there were times they worked with her. Now, today the JVP doesn't have a word of criticism of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe or of Chandrika. Its criticism is limited to Mahinda Rajapaksa, and now on and off is directed at President Sirisena. Now, what is the result? The result is that the JVP, for the first time, is outside the two spaces that it used to occupy. One, a kind of a radical nationalist or national liberationist space, in which Ranil always used to be a target. Now, the JVP has jumped out of that because it's no longer criticizing Ranil. It's criticizing the two personalities who have nationalist credentials, Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and Maithripala Sirisena, on and off.
So you believe that was the underlying reason for some
That's one thing. The second is, it's also jumped out of the space of attacking both equally. And I forgot to add something, that the JVP has always been a party with an international perspective, what they would call anti-imperialist, broadly speaking pro-Russia, China. Now the JVP actually tried to invade the Russian embassy and demand deeds to, title deeds. Mr. Anurakumar Dissanayake has been in the forefront of the propaganda against the Port City project, and he's even used words of derision such as China and Chino, which means, it's really colloquial, it means chink, so it's not a polite word to use. And for the average JVP activist, this must be hugely confusing. We don't protest against the US Assistant Secretary Tom Malinowski going to the Mullaitivu beach and laying a wreath. We don't protest against Prime Minister Modi saying go beyond the 13th Amendment towards federalism, but we do try to invade the Russian embassy and we criticize the Chinese. So I think Somavan Samarasinghe just couldn't take it anymore. He could not, this was just too much, a break from what he knew to be the JVP and its very founding. And though I don't think he's a threat to the JVP, I don't think he's a credible competitor, he's over the hill, I do think it's a sign that the JVP has jumped the rails, and therefore it'll get his votes, but it'll get the votes from the Hansaya, or the swarm, the Yahapalana vote base. It will forfeit the votes that it used to get earlier. So it'll be splitting, really, it'll be taking votes away from the UNP.
Well, Doctor, unfortunately we've come to the end of our show. We have a lot to discuss, but time's run out. But when we meet again in a fortnight, there will be plenty more, and we'll have our plate full of stuff to talk about when we meet again in a fortnight. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us on Vantage Point. And for everyone,
once again, congratulations.
Thank you. And for everyone watching us at home, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again in a fortnight with a different view on Vantage Point. Good night.